Welcome, and thanks for joining us for the second of hopefully many Lunch and Learn seminars. My name is Bob Strickland. I do the business development for Reynolds Restoration Services. We are a full-service disaster restoration company that has 3 different offices in Harrisburg, King of Prussia, and Elkridge, Maryland, handling property losses in 5 different states and the District of Columbia. Very quickly, I want to tell you that if you are watching this live, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you come up with questions during the seminar, please submit those, and we will try to answer those the best we can at the end of the seminar. I want to also take a minute to introduce you to the team. There we go. So Greg Dunsel and Ryan McGuff also do business development for Reynolds, and Anthony Worrell, who is the president of Reynolds Restoration Services. As you can see, we have over 95 years of experience in the industry. Doesn't necessarily make us experts, but it does make us a little bit long in the tooth. But it is what it is, as probably Manuel would say. So let's jump right into this. When we talk about disasters, we always think about the major 4 disasters, right? Fire, smoke, water, wind. But we don't always think about the 5th one, which is mold, which a lot of times is caused by the other 4 disasters. So here are some of the things that we're going to go over during this seminar. What is mold? The types of mold, the causes of mold, how can we prevent it? Can I remove it myself? When should I call a professional to remove it? What is a professional mold remediation contractor look like, and how do they work? And what is the role of an industrial hygienist? So what is mold? Well, mold has been around since the beginning of time. In fact, in the Bible, the 3rd book of the Bible, in Leviticus chapter 14, you can read about mold. Mold is expressed there of what it looks like, the different colors of mold, how it was remediated by the priest, and when he called it clean. So there's my book report for the day. Check out the Bible this weekend if you like. Turn to Leviticus, you'll learn all about mold. But mold is a fungi. It is around us, it's indoors, it's outdoors. In fact, we ingest mold, right? If you like blue cheese dressing, guess what? You're eating mold, and that's fine. So there are good molds, there's not so good molds. We want to make sure that we keep the outdoors out, the indoors in, and we coordinate the 2 of them together. So what is the practical way to eliminate mold and mold spores? Now, if you think of mold spores like you think of drywall dust, so when you do your basement and you do drywall in your basement, a lot of times you'll find that drywall dust maybe as far as the attic, right? Mold spores are the same way. So that drywall dust is very airborne. It kind of follows the air currents of your house, and obviously your house pulls air from the basement all the way up through the roof vent. That's why you find that drywall dust in your attic. Mold spores are the same way. The problem with mold spores is you don't see them, you don't know where they're going to land, and then if they get the right conditions, that's when they start to cause problems. So always remember that mold spores fall about 1 inch per hour. So as soon as you get those mold spores airborne, they're going to be all over the place. Currently, there are no EPA regulations or standards about mold contaminants. Remember that we are still working off the IAQ, which is the Indoor Air Quality Standards, which were developed years ago. And in fact, they were developed off of the 1993 New York City guidelines. So yes, 1993, and it is 2021. So let's go through what are some of the types of mold. Some of these you may have heard of, some of you may have not have heard of them, but here are some of the names of them. So Aspergillus, I'm sure that you've seen maybe that name, and obviously Stachybotrys. That is the worst kind of mold. In fact, back in the day, back in the 90s, when people started talking about Stachybotrys, they talked about it being this harmful killer mold. Well, let's think of mold as what causes problems with some people may not cause problems with other people. So here are some of the issues that can be caused by Stachybotrys. You've got hay fevers, asthma, nasal, throat irritation. So remember, our respiratory systems are all different. We're not all alike. So sometimes in your respiratory system, you have problems with pollen, right? You have problems with maybe dust mites. Um, there are certain people that have very hard problems with mold. May not affect you, but may affect one of your tenants. So we need to keep that in mind as we go through the seminar, knowing that molds don't affect everybody the same way. So what causes mold? What are the right conditions for mold growth? You basically have the big four, is what we're going to call them, right? So you have water or moisture, you have a food source, you have oxygen, and then you need the ideal temperature. So really think of mold as a living and breathing being. It's not some inanimate object. It's actually a actual living being, just like us. So we need water, right? We need a food source, we need the right environment, and we need ideal temperatures. Mold is going to need all four of those. So we're going to go kind of through all four and see how they impact molds in a indoor environment. So water, more excessive, right? It's an excessive amount of moisture or water. This will cause growths to form. Common culprits, very easy, right? Leaky faucets, your leaky roof, you see the stain on the ceiling tiles. Those are all causing problems that you may or may not know could be leading to a mold growth in your facility. Cracked windows and doors, we just always want to make sure that the maintenance is up on our facilities. So the food source. So any organic material, right? So think of your carpet has organic fibers in it, plus the backing of the carpet, plus the glue. Think of your drywall. You have paper, it's an organic material, plus glue, right? All that is organic material. Those are all great food sources for molds. That's why you see mold growth a lot of times on those particular substrates or systems in your building itself. So wood, paper, all that. What are the best environment for it to grow? Well, again, it needs oxygen. You can't remove the oxygen, right? So we have to be able to control the airflow. So think of mold as in your shower. So where does the mold typically form in your shower? It's always in the corners, right? Because there's no airflow in the corners, right? The airflow goes away. Another reason why you always see cobwebs in the corners of your room, right? Because the airflow avoids those. So if there's less airflow, that's where mold is going to have an opportunity to attach itself and to grow. How about temperature-wise? Cannot survive below 40 degrees, and it thrives really between 77 and 86 degrees. Those are actually your perfect temperatures to have a mold growth. So now that we talked about what causes it, let's talk about how do we prevent it. Controlling the conditions, right? We got to control the moisture, the food source, the environment, and the temperature. So let's talk about how we can control those. Relative humidity. Always think that is my biggest adversary when it comes to my indoor space is the relative humidity. Not always the temperature, but how high is that relative humidity? Because again, relative humidity equates to moisture. Moisture then equates to mold spores, which then creates to the perfect environment for that mold to grow. So we want to make sure that we're between 30 and 50% in the relative humidity market. Obviously, dehumidifiers can be a big key to helping with those spaces, especially as we get into the warm and humid months, right? We've been pretty good so far. If you're not watching this live, this is June in Pennsylvania. We've been extremely great with weather in the 70s, low humidity, but those hot and humid days are about to show up. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our indoor environment between 30 and 50%. So how about prevention in terms of food sources? So cardboard, don't keep excess cardboard in your spaces. And again, remember, we talked about airflow, right? So when you take those copy boxes that are cardboard and we put it directly on our glue down carpet, and there's no airflow between the box and the carpet, and it gets to be humid, there can be moisture that forms between the box and the carpet, and that could be a great place for mold to start growing. So do what you do in your basement, right? Lift everything up off the floor. Keep it away from direct contact with organic material. Don't pile boxes directly up to your drywall. Don't pile them directly on your carpet. Store items in an airtight containers. Easy for somebody else to say. Overcooling, short cycling, and fresh air intakes. Now remember, HVAC units love occupied spaces. They're not great with empty spaces. Schools have the biggest issue because in the summer, they're completely vacant and those HVAC units just don't quite keep up with the temperature and the humidity in those structures because there's not enough people moving in. They're not displacing anything. That air is just stagnant. So make sure that the one thing that we've known for 16 months is that our buildings are not exactly full of people. Now, I'm hopeful that by the end of the summer, they will be back to 80 to 90 to 100% occupancy. But until then, realize that your HVAC units may not be working at 100% efficiency because there's not enough people in those spaces. So make sure that they're not overcooling. Make sure that they're not short cycling. And check your fresh air intakes. Seems simple, right? But I've been to too many structures where you go up on the roof, the fresh air intake, there's a bunch of rotted leaves. Perfect place for mold spores to be brought into the building. Again, that mold may not show up anywhere in your building, but given the right environment, it may grow. Look at your fresh air intakes on the outside of your building by your landscaping. What about the mulch? Is the mulch growing that shotgun mold? Is it bringing in that particular contaminated air into your building? Make sure your fresh air intakes are actually bringing in fresh air. So how about temperature-wise? Don't shut the HVAC unit off. Seems simple, right? But vacant buildings, it's springtime, people shut the system down, they forget to bring it back up. Perfect conditions again. Even if there isn't carpet in there, there's still going to be drywall, there's still paper in the drywall, there's still glue, there's still environment for mold to grow in. Keep the thermostat set in the 70s, not in the 80s. Help yourself. Keep that environment a clean environment. Some more HVAC tips. Again, keep those humidity levels between 30 and 60%. Make sure that you're checking them, right? Check those humidity levels throughout the day, throughout the week. Use air conditioning and dehumidification together to help control that. Remove standing water from ACs, use antimicrobial solutions in the drip pans. It all seems common sense, right? But the problem is that we've all been cutting back on our budgets, right? So we're not in touch with our HVAC contractors as best that we can be. Get them out there, make sure that they're servicing it. Realize that when we've hit the first heat wave, they're going to be taxed. They're going to be hard to get out to your buildings. Get a hold of them now. Get them out there, make sure that they're servicing the units properly. Get the CO2 sensors on it, get dehumidification sensors, make sure that the dampers are set properly. When we talk about floor and carpet cleaning, make sure that your janitorial staff is actually, if they're steam cleaning, they're steam cleaning. They're not hot water cleaning. Okay, the more that you continually desaturate those carpets, the more that moisture is going to stay between that glue down carpet and your concrete floor. Again, go back to airflow, right? There's no airflow between that carpet and the concrete floor. You have glue, a perfect food source for mold. You have moisture. Now all you do is you create an environment where there's possible mold growth that you may not see for years, and then suddenly it will show up somewhere. Make sure also that when they mop your bathroom floors, they're not slopping the water up the walls. Again, you have vinyl cove typically, or a tile cove. right up against the drywall, no airflow again, going to get wet, going to be a perfect environment for mold to grow. So you want to make sure you're on top of everything, all the maintenance and all the cleaning in your building to kind of keep everything flowing properly. How about exhausts, right? You take a shower at home, you exhaust that humid and that steam out of your bathroom because you don't want mold to grow. The same way in your buildings. Make sure that all your exhaust fans are free and clear. Make sure the ventilation is properly. Service the equipment regularly. Maintenance tips, right? Make sure you're checking the condensation on cold surfaces, right? Cold water pipes. Make sure that they're insulated properly. Make sure that you repair plumbing leaks. Putting a bucket underneath a plumbing leak is not a repair, okay? That's just to keep everything from getting wet. Make sure you repair it properly. Make sure that it's dried properly. When we talk about insulating cold water pipes, we just did a project where we opened up the drop ceiling and all the insulation of cold water pipes was covered in mold. Reason being, it was the wrong insulation. Make sure that your insulation is polyethylene or polystyrene or cellular glass. Make sure that it's the proper insulation around those cold water pipes. Also, you want to insulate them because if not, they're going to sweat, they're going to get on your ceiling tile. Your ceiling tile has a possibility of growing mold. You're not going to know that there's mold growth on the back of your ceiling tile until an issue happens, and then it's going to be too late. So now we've talked about everything. Let's talk about removal. Can I remove it myself? Yes and no. How about that for a hedge? It's going to all depend on how comfortable you feel. If you are going to do it yourself, make sure that you clean and dry the area. Make sure that you remove it with detergent. Make sure that you clean all the surfaces and know that if there is mold on the wall, there may be a bigger issue behind the wall. What is causing that mold? Is it just caused because you had a room where the relative humidity rose and it just got surface mold? Or is it something from the outside, the grading of your landscaping that's causing water to infiltrate that substrate and cause mold on the backside of the drywall? When you go to do the mold, make sure that you wear PPE. Remember, mold spores, 1 inch per hour. Once you get them airborne, they become more dangerous than if they're just up against the wall. So make sure that you're using proper PPE and that you're removing all that PPE before you get out of that contaminated area. Some of the things that you can use to remove the mold: bleach, hydrogen peroxide, white vinegar, baking soda, all things you can find at the supermarket. Again, it's going to be your discretion. It's your building. You need to figure out, is this the proper thing that I should do? Now that we talked about you doing it, when to escalate? Well, pretty sure that's when you want to escalate the idea of mold, right? When it looks like that. Now that was a built-in cabinet, so honestly you couldn't see any of that until the built-in was removed. So this is when you need to escalate your mold remediation qualities. So how do we do that? Where do we start? Air quality testing and sampling. So no EPA or other federal limits have been set for mold or mold spores. So sampling is our best opportunity to figure out what to do when it comes to mold remediation. And the best thing that we can do is actually get what's called an industrial hygienist involved. So what that industrial hygienist will do is they will do air and swab sampling. They will do pre and post sampling. So what this will do is this will not only protect you when it comes down to the final product, but it will also protect me as a remediation contractor because they're going to write the protocol of how they want that mold remediated. So this is an example of one of their reports of what they look like, okay? So as you can see, they're going to set the protocols. If we expand the report a little bit, you will see that you've got an affected area, an unaffected area, and then the outside. So that's going to give you a baseline. So every building is a little different. So we can't say that this many spores is exactly the way it should be in every single building. We have to make sure that we know what the spore count is outside, whether it's inner city property or center city property or a suburban property. Everything's going to revolve around what they find outside, what they find in the unaffected space, and then what they find in the affected space. And that will determine how an IH writes the protocol for how to remediate it. And then with the post sampling, they're going to give you basically a clean bill of health. So you can go to your tenants or you can go to your homeowners and say, hey, listen, this was remediated properly. Here's the paperwork so that everybody is protected. So some of the equipment that we use when we do that kind of work, first of all, we always set up containment because again, mold spores, how they travel in the air currents. So we're going to contain that particular area. We're going to make sure that we have plastic set up. We're going to pull negative air so that no air is escaping in that containment area. We're going to clean all the surfaces with a certain biocide. And we're also going to use a HEPA vac. We don't want to use a shop vac because that's not a good enough filter. We use a HEPA vac, so it filters out 99.99% of contaminants. And we're also going to scrub the air. So we're doing everything that we can to remove the mold out of your facility, but also make sure that we're not recontaminating other areas of the facility by carrying those spores with us into areas that are clean. One of the biocides that we use is called Benefact, right? It's 2021. We want to make sure that we use green chemicals. Benefact is plant-based. It has very, very low toxicity, and it's a great product that we use, and it's just one of those that we use for mold remediation. So we're going to give you some pictures of some of the sample products that projects that we had. This is one where we have a great containment system set up that you can see into the space, and you can see how taut it is. That means that the airflow behind it has a negative airflow, so that we've got it really conditioned. It's a real conditioned space. So it's probably a space that has been remediated or is in the process of being remediated. We want to make sure that we're scrubbing the air. We're getting all those, as many spores as possible out of that particular space and making sure that it's clean. And we will get the IH back in there for her to do her air and swab testing. And then she can give us the clean bill of health and make sure that it's back to the unaffected area spaces. Some other examples, we've obviously seen the big one. The one on the top right here, that is a desk. Underside of desks, I always tell people, if you want to know what's going on in your vacant spaces, go to the underside of your desk and take a flashlight and shine at it, okay? That is a great opportunity for mold to grow because it is pressed board with a lot of wood fiber and glue. It's a great food source for mold. And then in the next series, you will see that books are also another great food source. So it's that cardboard and the paper and the glue, the spines of books. And you see that those books are tightly packed together, okay? Again, airflow. Always think of airflow. Always think, how can I improve airflow so that I don't get really a stale structure that can promote some kind of mold growth. This is an example of the building where they shut down the air conditioning and forgot to turn it on. This is just one of about 20 rooms, all of them completely covered in mold. Not because there was a water damage there, but because it got so high in relative humidity that it became the perfect environment for mold spores to settle. And then they found themselves a food source, right? They found themselves the paper and the drywall and the glue, the perfect amount to eat. So, in conclusion, we cannot eradicate mold. We can only look to control it, right? Keep the outside out, keep the inside in. Timing is everything, right? Everything in life is about timing. Don't ignore a mold issue. Don't wait. Get it looked at. And when in doubt, check it out. Whether that's somebody like us, whether that's an industrial hygienist, whether that's a building engineer, make sure that you're looking at all your spaces, especially now when they're vacant. make sure that you're taking a look at it, inspecting them, and making sure that they are clean for when your tenants actually come back. So now we're going to take a moment and see, I see a couple questions have come in. So I think the moderator will jump in and we'll see what kind of questions we can answer for you.
Yes, Bob. The first question we have is, does a musty smell automatically mean there's mold present?
So we all know the word musty, right? Because that's what, when you went to your grandmother's house, you went in her basement and you're just like, yeah, you came home, you had to wash your clothes, right? Because they all smelled musty. So musty really is just another term for that four-letter word of mold, okay? So when you smell that mustiness, that's really what mold spores smell like as they're eating and growing. So yes, mustiness does almost 100% of the time equate to some kind of mold. It may not be bad, but it does equate to some kind of mold damage somewhere.
Okay, another question we have is, can you do moisture testing in buildings?
Yes, so we can do that for you. So we basically will use 3 different devices to do the mold, to do testing for moisture in your building. So we have a moisture device that will show whether there is moisture in the wall or on the carpet. Then we have a hygrometer, which will test the relative humidity in the space. And then we also have a thermal imaging camera, which will then look, and it will actually look behind the walls. And what thermal imaging does is if there's a leak somewhere, water will hold heat longer than anything else, so it'll show up as heat. So thermal imaging really was used by firemen to find people in a fire, because they have a different heat source than the rest of the fire. So they could actually see the outline of the people. So that's how thermal imaging cameras started. Then they realized that we could use that to actually see if there was some kind of leak behind the walls that you wouldn't just see visually on this side of the wall. So we'll use a moisture meter, we'll use a hygrometer, and we can use a thermal imaging camera and kind of give you a great idea of where you were at in that space.
Okay, we have one more. How do I know my contractor remediated the mold properly?
So first of all, hopefully the contractor that you choose, you have some kind of relationship with. That's always important. It's just like your family doctor, right? You don't want to go to a doctor you have no relationship with when you have a problem. You want to set that up ahead of time and make sure that you have a relationship with that doctor so that when something does go wrong, you can have more of an honest conversation. So that's the first thing. Get a good restoration contractor. You have a good relationship that you can trust. Number 2, this is where I really think industrial hygienists come into play, okay? They're going to protect me and they're going to protect you because they're going to write the protocol. They're going to do all the testing. They're a third party, so they're divorced from the situation. And they're going to make sure that everybody's protected and they're going to give that clean bill of health that only they can do. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, that's all the questions we have, Bob. Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks very much for everybody that joined us today. Thank you if you're watching online later. And please feel free to reach out to Reynolds Restoration Services if we could help you. And hopefully this was informative. Till next time.